Hello. Today I would like to go over how to bake an occlusion map, an ambient occlusion map. Not only how to bake an ambient occlusion map, but also how to get started texturing a model. I've had a few requests for that information, so rather than just doing a quick video on just how to get started and do like a UV snapshot, I figured I would throw that in at the end of a ambient occlusion baking tutorial, because baking an ambient occlusion map is really a cool way to get started on your texturing map. It gives you quite a bit of detail and realism with ambient occlusion. First of all, what exactly is ambient occlusion? It's kind of like shadows, and I guess in the real physical world it is a shadow, but our rendering systems don't always calculate shadows in a physically realistic way. They do a pretty awesome job with it most of the times, but they can't get a certain amount of detail. And usually what I tell my students to do to kind of visualize what exactly ambient occlusion is just to take their fingers, like their thumb and their pointer finger, and pinch them together. And what you'll see in between them is kind of a little dark line. And that's basically an area that light can't quite reach. So it kind of bounces around until it gets to that crevice, and it can't quite reach that crevice. So then you have a little bit of shadow in there. And a lot of times that's such a fine amount of detail, that's such a small amount of detail, that our rendering engines can't always calculate it the way it should be. So we kind of fool it and do this thing called an ambient occlusion map. So basically that's what I'm going to show you how to do today. So what I have here is our lantern that I laid out the UVs for in my UV mapping part 2 video. But before I get started, I want to just go over quickly a couple new features in Maya 2015 that kind of helps the UV layout process quite a bit. So the first one is an added automatic material checker pattern. I usually go in and use this UV grid that I just downloaded from Google and apply it to my model. And again, this helps me kind of lay out, make sure all my letters are facing the right way, make sure all my model is the right way. But now Maya has added an automatic pattern to our UV texture editor. And that's this little checker box right up here. And if you click that, it won't apply to my model because I have another material assigned to it, but we will see it in our UV texture editor. So it basically adds this checker pattern for you. And normally if you're starting from scratch, if you have a default model with a Lambert 1 default material, it'll automatically apply it to your viewport. So it's really cool and quick to use. However, if I'm doing a really extensive model, if I'm doing something really complicated, I'll probably end up still going in and using this UV grid just because it has the letters on it, and it kind of helps me see if things are stretched and if everything's sort of facing the right direction. So I'll turn that off for now, and I'll go ahead and turn my texture off for now as well. The other really cool feature that Maya has added is a shader. If I apply that little display UV distortion button there, that'll basically let me know how stretched my UV faces are. So if I come up here to these two guys, you'll see that basically what I'm looking for is as close to white as I can possibly get. If it gets to be really dark blue or really dark red, that means there's a lot of distortion in the model. So this guy is kind of red here. So if I just go to my UV mode and I move that guy over, you'll see it start to change to white. And if I move it over too much, it'll start to change to dark blue. And either dark blue or red means that that UV is being really distorted. So I'm just going to try and get it to a color that kind of matches this for now. Same with this guy here. So that's a really cool feature, and I can see myself using this quite a bit. This is something that's been in other programs like Headis UV layout for years, and it's really cool. I'm excited that Maya or Autodesk has finally implemented something like this into Maya's UV texture editor, because for the most part I like to work with as few programs as possible. It's cool learning new programs, and it can't hurt to like expand your arsenal, so to speak, all the different types of programs you know. But I find that I work most efficiently if I don't have to switch between programs so often. So I generally just like to do all my UV layout right here in Maya. So it's really cool that we have that feature now. Okay, so baking an ambient occlusion map. The first thing I'm going to do is just go ahead and reapply my Lambert 1, or actually I'll make a new material. So I'll go to assign favorite material, I'll assign a blend, and I'll name this AO blend. Oops, I changed the name of my object, so let me change that. Might as well name that to lantern. So I'll change the name of my object to lantern. I'll change the name of my material to AO blend. So I need to create a ground plane. If I just bake the ambient occlusion as it is, I will get some detail around areas, you know, like these areas here, which I want, but the one thing I'm going to miss is kind of shadows that are created, or the ambient occlusion that's created from the ground. So I'm not going to need the ground plane afterwards. I just need it to bake my ambient occlusion map. So I'll go ahead and just make a plane. It doesn't really matter how many divisions it has or anything like that, because I'm just going to delete it later, and I don't really need the plane itself. I just need something to sort of give me a dark edge around the bottom of my model. So once I have that, I'm going to select my model in object mode, and the first thing I want to check is to make sure that I have my Mental Ray plugin activated. This is a process that uses Mental Ray to bake your ambient occlusion map, so if you don't have it activated, you definitely need to go in and activate your Mental Ray plugin. So to do that, I'm going to go to Window, Settings and Preferences, Plugin Manager. And then we have a long list of all these plugins here, and if we come down to the bottom, we're going to see Maya to MR, and you want to make sure that that's checked to loaded. Just for the sake of always having it loaded, I'm going to go ahead and click loaded and auto load, and then close, and that will just ensure that my Mental Ray plugin is activated. Next, I'm going to go to my rendering menu set. So where it says polygons here, I'm going to click and go down to rendering. And then I'm going to go to my lighting and shading menu. So I'll click that, and we see a option here called Batch Bake Mental Ray. Now if you don't have your Mental Ray plugin activated, this will be grayed out. You won't be able to select it. So we're going to go to Batch Bake Mental Ray, and then we get this pretty long dialog box that pops up, and for the most part at the beginning all this other stuff is going to be grayed out, and that's just because there are some automatic settings that determine how an occlusion map is baked inside of Maya. However, we want to override that setting. So the first thing we're going to do is the very bottom setting here, the very bottom checkbox under setting is use bake set override. So I'm going to click that, And what that's going to do is unlock all these features for me. So now I have a lot of control over my ambient occlusion map. So the first thing I will do is under Objects to Bake, I want to make sure that's set to Selected. I can bake all the objects in my scene if I want. However, I don't really want an ambient occlusion map for that ground plane. I'm just going to delete it when I'm done with it. So at the moment, I always prefer to just do Selected, and I can select multiple objects if I want to bake multiple objects. Skip objects in initial bake set, we'll leave that unchecked. I want to bake to texture, not to vertices. You can bake ambient occlusion to vertices, and a lot of game engines do that by default, which is really cool. If you have a big scene, you can kind of select the entire scene, bake ambient occlusion to your vertices, and then you can import that into a game engine, and you don't have the extra texture map that you need. In our case, we're going to bake it to texture because we're going to use this as a starting point to create our color texture. So I'm going to bake to texture. Bake optimization, multiple objects. We just have a single object, so I'm just going to select single object. I don't want to bake my shadows. We can leave camera at perspective at the moment. The camera doesn't really matter because we're baking it to the texture, so we'll leave that the way it is at the moment. And then we come down to our texture bake set override. Under color mode, I want to select occlusion because I'm baking my ambient occlusion here. So I'll select occlusion. At the moment, just to see how this works, I'm going to set my occlusion rays. I'll leave them at the default, excuse me, and my occlusion fall off at the default. Prefix baked. We'll start out with a 512 texture. Once I bake it and I see that everything is kind of working well, I'll increase that to 1024 or 2048 or something like that. Our file format, instead of a TIFF, I'm going to go with a I usually like to deal with PNGs. It doesn't look like there's a PNG option though, so we'll just do a JPEG. There's no need for having an uncompressed large file for this. Number of samples, I'll leave that. We definitely want to bake it to one map. We don't want multiple maps. Bake alpha means that all the spaces in between our UV layout will be transparent when we bring that into Photoshop. However, this means you need a file format that supports alpha. So since we're we're formatting or exporting to JPEG, JPEGs do not support transparency, so we don't really need to worry about bake to alpha. If I wanted to do a TIFF or a TGA that does support alpha, I could do that as well, but I kind of like not having the alpha. It gives me a lot of contrast, and it lets me visually separate parts of my model from the empty space of the UV layout. So I'll leave bake to alpha checked off. Final gather quality and final gather reflect, I'm going to leave those at the default for now. We're using our normal 0 to 1 UV space, so there's no need to change that. The very bottom texture here, sorry about that. The very bottom texture here, or very bottom option here, fill texture seams. This is basically, I'll kind of explain, I think the best way to explain what this is to actually show you. So at the moment, I'll leave this at 1. And I'll come in and increase this on the next go through when we bake a higher resolution texture. So everything's ready for now to bake an ambient occlusion map. The one thing I like to do, and sometimes I forget whenever I hit convert and close or convert, or when I'm generally rendering, when you do anything that takes a while, that takes a lot of resources and may take a few minutes in Maya, you usually get a little progress window right here, or a little progress bar right here. However, when you minimize your windows, they cover that up. So if you're going to do something that takes a while, it's going to, process for a few minutes, make sure you don't have anything covering that up so you can kind of see your progress bar. I'm just going to leave these guys both maximized, and then I'll show you that progress bar. So now I can just hit convert and close, and there's that progress bar. Now this, because we're baking a fairly small image, it's not going to take that long. So there we have it, it's done, and it's already applied to our object. So if I go to my, let's turn off wireframe on shaded. So now we have our ambient occlusion map baked to our, applied to our material and baked on our lantern. However, we do have some artifacting here. We do have some problems. This is partly due to our resolution and partly due to our, let me bring up my window again. So to get to that is under lighting, shading, batch bake, mental ray. So part of that is because of our resolution. I definitely want to go in and increase my resolution just so I don't get so many dots. So I'll set this to something like 2048 by 2048, and this will, make it take much longer to render or bake. The other problem is we get these dark lines along our edges, and if I click on my object and we look at the texture here, basically what's happening, if I zoom way in to one of my edges here, basically what's happening is our pixels, let me turn on so we can see all of our square pixels. That's another good reason that little button right there is useful, so you can actually see your pixels and they're not blurred. But our pixels are only going to the edge of our UV seam, and because our pixels are square, some of them aren't quite hitting the edge. Some of them are coming in like this. So that's kind of why we get those dark lines around the edges. So to fix that, that's what our fill texture seam setting does. So right now it's set to 1, so it's saying, well, we're only going to go outside of the UV 1 pixel. I want it to be much more than that, especially since I increased my resolution to 2048. I can come in and I can set this to like something like 5 would probably do. I might even want to set that higher at some point, like 10. But let's see how 5 works out for us. The other setting I may want to change is my occlusion fall off. That's currently set to 0. Whenever it's set to 0, and a lot of attributes in Maya use this same kind of technique, but whenever something is set to 0, that means Maya is going to figure it out on its own. So even though it's set to 0, that doesn't necessarily mean it's 0. That just means that Maya is auto-calculating that occlusion fall off. So I'm going to run it just to see how it turns out, but I may want to come in and change this to increase or decrease the fall off of my occlusion map. And that's basically, talking about fall off, that's basically the distance that our dark is falling off into whiteness. So if I want to shorten that distance, if I want to make that dark edge go farther out, I can increase that or decrease that. All right, so let's try this again. Again, this is going to take probably a few minutes since it's a much larger resolution. I want to make sure that my progress bar is visible, and I will hit convert. And just so you don't have to wait through the whole thing, I'm just going to pause the video real quick and be back when it's done. Alright, so our ambient occlusion map just finished baking. Probably took about, I would say, 2 minutes total. So let's take a look at our model. We do still have a little bit of a black line there. So I may want to come in and increase my fill texture seams a little bit more. But for the most part, it doesn't look too bad. It looks pretty good. We get some nice smooth transitions of our fall off here. I may want to increase my occlusion rays, and I might go ahead and try increasing my occlusion fall off to something like 50. So let's go to, go back to shaded mode. Occlusion fall off, I'm going to, we'll set that to something like 50. I'm going to change my occlusion rays. I'm going to move up in powers of 2. So you don't have to. I just kind of like to. It helps me keep track of what things are. So I'm going to go from 64 to 128. And let's, just to be safe, let's take a look at our UVs. And our fill texture seam is going plenty, is a good distance out. But we still have some artifacting happening in there. Hopefully that fixes with the increase of our occlusion rays. So basically, occlusion rays just means it's shooting out more rays. So you're going to have less of a dotty pattern in there, and it's going to be a little bit smoother, but it will again take a little longer to render. So let's go ahead and re-render this and see what we get. Okay, so there's still a little bit of artifacting going on that I may have to clean up in Photoshop, but I think just for demonstration purposes, this is pretty good for now. Again, I can come in and decrease my fall off if I don't want the kind of shading to go so far out. I can drop that by, I can drop that down to 25, and it'll come, not so like half as far out as before. But I think what I have now is probably good for starting texturing. So, so I can close my mental ray batch bake options now, and I can look at the actual file that baking my occlusion map has created. Now, finding this file is a bit tricky. It puts it somewhere in your scene files, whether you're in your default directory or you created a project just for the model you're working on. The easiest way to sort of locate this file is just to look in your material. So if I go to material attributes, it's going to be plugged into your incandescence. And every time you do this, it creates a new material. So I may have to go in and delete some materials. So just look at where it's plugged in, incandescence, and I'm going to click on this little input connection so I can see where that's going. And then I can see where this file is being located. So it's in my project directory under render data, mental ray light map, baked.jpg. the quickest way to get to this is to just click on the little folder there, and that will bring me right to that file, and then I can just let's see, should be able to just open that up. So let's go to copy, and then we'll jump over to Photoshop, go to File, New, and I don't think that's going to work, so let's see if we can drag that into if you go to View, it'll open it up in F-check, which is another cool way to take a look at that. However, I want to get to that and get it in Photoshop. So I basically just dragged that to my desktop, and then I can come over to Photoshop and open that right up in Photoshop. So there is my ambient occlusion map. I can always come in and fix some of this artifacting with a healing brush. So I can select my healing brush there, and I can come in and try to fix that, or I can use my clone stamp. So to use your clone stamp in Photoshop, just hover somewhere nearby the area you want to fix and hold down Alt. Your cursor will change, so that's when you're going to sample that area. So now I can come in and kind of paint over those artifact areas. But what I have is pretty good for demonstration purposes. So this is an excellent way to start your texture. So the next process of starting texturing your object is to create a UV snapshot. So I can apply my UVs to my Photoshop file and kind of get an idea of where everything is. So let's jump back over to Maya, and I'm going to go to my UV texture editor. I'm going to go to polygons, and down at the very bottom you see UV snapshot. So I'll click that. For file name, let's just go ahead and put this on my desktop. That way it's easy to find. I could put it somewhere in my project directory too, but for this purpose, I'm just going to save it to my desktop. So under file name, out UV is fine, but I'm going to browse to my desktop. And we'll leave it named out UV. Click Save. Now that didn't actually save the file. That just saved the location for the file. The next thing I want to do is pick my resolution. So the resolution for my occlusion map is 2048. So I want to stay to that that resolution. So I'll change my size to 2048 by 2048. I want to keep the aspect ratio. I want my UVs to be white, so I'll leave that color value white. I want anti-aliasing on, and I want my image format to be a JPEG. I could also go with PNG, but since my occlusion map is a JPEG, I'll stick to a JPEG. We're using the normal 0 to 1 UV space, so I'll leave that, and then just click OK. Now this is something that just happens really quickly. It doesn't need any time to calculate, so my UV snapshot is already saved. So I'll go to Photoshop, and I need to bring in my UV snapshot. So I'll go to File, place embedded. The difference between these two, and this is something new in Photoshop CC, if I place linked, that means it won't actually put the file in my Photoshop file. It won't put those UVs in my Photoshop file. It will just link to that file. So if I ever change computers and I don't have that UV file, it won't be able to read it because it's only being linked to the location. I don't usually like to do that. I like to have everything inside of my Photoshop file. So I'm going to go to place embedded, and that way it'll embed that file into my Photoshop file. So I'll go to place embedded, and then let's find our UVs here. I need to clean up my desktop a little bit. Sorry for the mess. So I'm looking for out UVs. And there we have them. So I'll go to place, and that will just throw those right on top. I'll click enter. And now one thing Photoshop does that also kind of annoys me a little bit, and I like to turn off, is whenever you place a file, it places it as a smart object. And that sort of means it's a Photoshop file within a Photoshop file. And in this case, that's not something I need. So to sort of undo that, I'm going to double click on my out UV layer here. Actually, not double click it. Let me go back. I just went into that other Photoshop file that created. I'm going to right click on my UV and just go to rasterize layer, and that will just make it a regular old layer. Now in the future, if you don't want that to happen, you want to go to your preferences. So go to edit, preferences, general, and we're looking for this checkbox right here. Always create smart objects when placing. I want to turn that off. So that now when I place a file in there, it won't place it in as a smart object. Now I have my ambient occlusion map. I have my UVs. In order to see my sort of ambient occlusion map underneath, or see my UVs on top of whatever I'm doing, I just need to change the blending mode. So there's a couple different blending modes that you need to know here. And basically the difference is one makes your black areas completely transparent and your white areas completely opaque, and the other makes your white areas completely transparent and your black completely opaque. So if I wanted to make my black transparent, I'm going to go and switch my blending mode to screen, and then we see our white UVs on top, and our black has become completely transparent. Now if I want my UVs to be black so I can see them a little better and the background to be white, I'm going to switch this back to normal so you can see that. And I'm going to invert the colors of my UV layout. So I can do this by either going to Image, Adjustments, Invert, or we can see the hotkey here for that is just Control I. So I'm just going to hit Control I and invert that. So now my wireframe is black and the background is white. But before I do that, I'm going to undo that real quick. I'm going to duplicate my out UV because I'm going to use that later on to create some interesting scratches and stuff like that, which I'll probably show in the next video. So I'll go ahead and go to right click on that out UV and just duplicate that layer. And instead of out UV copy, I'm going to name this scratches and just turn that off for the moment. I'll go to my out UV layer. I'm going to invert that, Control I, and switch that to multiply. So multiply is going to make your white completely transparent and your black opaque. So we can see the black lines, but we don't see the white lines. Now before I go in and apply this to my model in Maya so we can start texturing it and seeing the difference of the things we're doing. I like to kind of block in a basic color for my objects, and this gives me an idea of what everything is. Just a simple color to kind of get an idea of all the different materials in my object. So what I'm going to do, the first thing I want to do is unlock my background layer, which is my ambient occlusion. Because I created this file from that ambient occlusion file, it makes that the background. So to fix that, you're just going to double click and I'll name this AO for ambient occlusion, and now that's no longer locked up. Okay, so I'm going to create a new layer, bring that to the bottom, and I'm going to name this base color. Okay, and then I can come in and make my colors. So the first thing I want to do is, again, I want to make my ambient occlusion to where I can see through the white and the black becomes opaque. So this will allow us to see our colors, or our ambient occlusion shading on top of our base colors. So I'm going to turn off my out UV because I don't really need that at the moment. I'm going to go to my base color, and I'm going to start just by filling it with a normal color. So I'll go to my paint bucket, and I'm going to select sort of a bluish gray color for my metal. Something's going wrong with my... I hope that's not my mic flipping out. Let's see. It looks like it's still working. So I'm just going to pick a grayish blue color and fill that in with the background. And I'm going to set my ambient occlusion layer to multiply. Okay. And now I can come in and let's think about the wood section of my model. So I'll go to my selection. We'll go to polygonal lasso, and I'm just going to select quickly the wood areas my model. So I got some of this stuff inside here, but I can deselect that by holding down my Alt key and then starting a new selection, and that's just going to minus one selection from the other. So all of my lantern parts there I do not want to be included. I do want that top bar of wood to be included though. Alright, so then I can come in with my paint bucket and we'll fill this with a brownish color to represent wood. Make sure you're on your base color layer and not your AO layer. So now that's all represented as wood. And then the only thing I have left that's not metal or wood is the actual glass of my lantern. So that one's easy enough. I'll just come in and select that. And we'll fill this with a bright yellowish orange color for a light, like so. Then I have all my sort of colors blocked out for my model. Now I'm ready to pretty much apply it to my model in Maya. I want to make sure I don't have my UVs on because I don't want those to show up on my model, so I'm going to make sure those are off. I'm going to save my Photoshop file, so I'll just save this to the desktop as lantern color texture PSD, and I'm going to save the texture out not as a PSD. So once again I'll go to File, oops, just got to hit OK there. So I'll go to File, Save As, and I'm going to save my texture out as a PNG. It's always important to, not PXR, PNG, it's always important to pick a good naming convention. So I like to do the name of the object, so lantern, underscore the type of texture we have, so in this case that is a color or diffuse, so I'll write diffuse, and then the resolution of the texture, which is 2048. So just by looking at the name of the texture, I know exactly what it is. I know it's the lantern, I know it's the color map for the lantern, and I know the resolution. So always pick a good naming convention. You never want to be confused and like start just sifting through files to try and figure out what goes to what. So I will hit save. Just hit OK, default options. And now we can jump into Maya and actually apply our texture. So I'm going to right click on our object and go to assign favorite material, and we'll assign a blend. I'm going to name this blend lantern matte, lantern material. And under the color is where I'm going to plug this in. So I'll go to color, file, and image name, and then we'll look for our lantern diffuse 2048. Open that guy up and apply it to my model, and everything looks good and pretty much ready to start modeling or texturing. Now as I come in and change things with my original PSD file, so let's jump back into Photoshop. So say I want to come in and change like the color of my lantern there. So instead of a yellowish color, let's come in and change it to sort of a redder orange light. So I just changed that really quickly. Actually, let's make it like a lighter yellow or whiter color, something like that. So whenever you change this, it's important to know that you need to save your PSD file, and you're really saving that for editability. So you can always go back and edit all your layers and everything, and then save your flattened PNG file as well. The flattened PNG file is what's attached to your Maya material. The reason I don't like just plugging in Photoshop files to my objects and my materials in Maya is because Mental Ray doesn't really like reading Photoshop files very well. So I usually like using something a little simpler like a PNG. So I made that change. I also think my ambient occlusion is a little strong, so I'm going to go to opacity and bump that down just a little bit. So I need to save my Photoshop file, so I'll just click Save to do that. And then I want to save my PNG file, so I'll go to Save As, change my format to PNG, and select Lantern Diffuse 2048 and save. It says it already exists. Yes, I do want to replace it. Okay. And now once it's done saving, if we jump back into Maya, it doesn't update automatically, but that's a really easy fix. To update it in Maya, I just need to go to my my material. So I'll right click and go to Material Attributes, and I just need to double click where it says Sample. If I double click, that will go in and update all my textures for that object. So just like that. So now my occlusion is a little lighter, my color is there, and it looks like we're ready to go and ready to start texturing our model. I can delete that ground plane that we don't need anymore, and yeah, that's it. So in the next video, I'll show you quickly how to get started texturing using image textures and a few other little tricks that I like to do to make it look sort of more realistic as an object. Okay, so I hope you learned a lot. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did enjoy my video, please subscribe to my channel. I will be adding many more tutorial videos like this. Thank you.